Hi, I'm Charles Shapiro. I'm the president of the Institute of the Americas. I want to welcome you here to our facilities on the campus of University of California, San Diego. Today is our speaker. We have Ambassador Mauro Vieira, who's the ambassador of Brazil to the United States. He's been here in Washington since January. This is his first trip to San Diego. It is his second tour of the United States, though, so he knows the United States very well. And he's also had a number of important posts in the Brazilian Foreign Ministry, including ambassador to Argentina and chief of staff to the foreign minister. The sponsor of today's event, and I want to thank them, is the Unified Port of San Diego. And I also want to, this is the advertisement, pay close attention here. This is the Institute of the Americas. Please go to our website, learn more about us. Please join the Institute of the Americas. We need, looking for members from San Diego area and from wherever you may reside. So please join us and work with us. And without any further ado, Ambassador Vieira, please, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shapiro. It's a great pleasure being here. It's true, thank you. I've been in Washington since January of last year, so it's been almost 2 years now. And this visit is overdue, long overdue. I learned from my colleagues at the Consulate General, Ambassador Graça Lima and Minister Eduardo Farias, who are long time friends. I was together 30 years ago at the embassy in Washington as a young secretary, working together with Ambassador Graça Lima. And he told me since the first time we met shortly after I got to Washington about San Diego and about the Institute. So I've been planning to come before, but unfortunately I had to change the date at least twice. So I would like today to thank you very much for organizing all that, and I'd like to, not to bore you with a long speech, but I would like at least to give you some information about Brazil. How is Brazil today, and why I should come and tell you things about Brazil, and what Brazil and the United States can do together. What's the future of our relation, how we can work to have better and deeper relations. First of all, I'd like to begin with a very few historic remarks. I like when I have to give this kind of talk to tell that Brazil and the United States have maybe the longest alliance in the Western Hemisphere. I'm sure in the Western Hemisphere it's the longest alliance. The United States established the first diplomatic post in Brazil before the independence of Brazil. It was a consulate general in 1804 in Rio de Janeiro, when Brazil was still part of the Portuguese Empire. And in 1822, when Brazil became independent from Portugal, the United States was the first country to recognize the independence of Brazil. And we started having resident diplomats since then. And up to 1904, we had legations and we had ministers plenipotentiary. In 1904, 1905, we elevated this legation to the level of embassy, of a full embassy. And we have had a very important and close relation and collaboration since then. In 1910, the United States became the first trade partner of Brazil. So it's a long history. Brazil has fought in both wars, First War and Second World War, and especially during Second World War, together with the United States, with 25,000 troops in Italy. So it's a long history of common positions and sharing the same values. Brazil, we also have a long tradition of bilateral visits by heads of states. We had back in 1876, the first head of state of Brazil visited the United States. It was then Emperor Pedro II in Brazil, who came to Philadelphia, to New York, to Philadelphia, and even to the West Coast, he spent about 3 months in this visit to the United States for the celebration of the centennial of the U.S. independence. And after that, we had a number of bilateral visits. We had the first U.S. president to visit Brazil was President Hoover. He went for the Pan American Conference in he went for the first time in 1928, the first head of state. And the first visit ever of a U.S. Secretary of State abroad was Secretary Root, who went to Brazil in 1904 for the Pan American Conference. And after that, of course, we had a number of bilateral visits. Since then, as many as 11 Brazilian presidents visited the United States, amounting to 16 visits in total. And 10 presidents of the United States paid 14 visits to Brazil. So President Obama visited Brazil early this year, in March, and we are now working on a future visit, maybe next year by February, March, or April, something around these months, of President Rousseff to the United States. She was invited by President Obama, and she is very keen on having this visit. But I also would like to share with you some brief reflections about Brazil-U.S. relations in light of the most recent developments in the international arena. Our relationship is founded fundamentally on shared values. Both Brazil and the United States are multi-ethnic and multicultural societies. Both our countries are liberal democracies based on the principles of free market and rule of law. Both countries believe in international law and multilateralism as the best way to find peaceful solutions to the world's most pressing problems. In our days, we have two long-term terms currently work to strengthen Brazil-U.S. relations. The first trend is the big change in the world from multipolarity, from unipolarity to multipolarity, and the huge size of the American economy, which accounts with 5% of the world population, accounts for 25% of the world's GDP. On the other side, the emergency of developing countries, of new economies, such as Brazil, India, Russia, and China, and especially the emergency of economies as Brazil, which makes Brazil has a larger and more important role in international relations. So this would be the second important trend I'd like to mention. And over the last few years, Brazil has undergone an incredible transformation. Economic stability has completely changed the business environment in the country and opened the way to increased consumption, savings, and investment. Once monetary stabilization was conquered, Brazil moved to combating hunger and extreme poverty. Macroeconomic stability was achieved with the advent of Plano Real back in '94, when our former president, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, was still Minister of Finance, and the macro stability laws that guaranteed this kind of advancement in our economy were taken during his government and continued during the next government, which was President Lula, who took office in 2003 and passed the presidency to President Rousseff the 1st of January this year. So the promotion of social inclusion, aside from its ethical dimension, had also a strong economic effect. Without losing sight of the need to maintain fiscal discipline, Brazil expanded its domestic market, created millions of new jobs, and strengthened the purchasing power of its population, while accumulating international reserve currency. As a result of these policies, Brazilian per capita GDP rose 21% in 8 years, and 31 million people were lifted out of poverty and entered the middle class, which today totals more or less 100 million people. In addition, 24 million people were lifted out of extreme poverty. the establishment of the Bolsa Familia, which is a program which could be translated into English as Family Stipend, a government-funded stipend that supports around 12 million families, was instrumental in distributing wealth and boosting the economy. Brazil's agribusiness has become one of the most productive in the world. Brazil is now the leading world exporter of iron, coffee, soybeans, orange juice, chicken, sugar, beef, and so on. But we are home to one of the world's largest oil reserves too. We are a global reference in biofuels, the 6th largest manufacturer of automobiles, the 3rd largest manufacturer of aircraft. Moreover, Brazil is home to the largest river basin, with our hydropower supplying 80 or 81% of electric generation. Back in 2003, Brazil was responsible for 1.3% of the world's economy. In 2010, having become the 7th biggest economy in the world, Brazil GDP represents 3.7% of the world economy. By some accounts, Brazil is already the 6th largest economy. By 2020, it will be the 5th. Our international reserves at a historical peak in October this year of about $352 billion. These changes enable Brazil to withstand the economic crisis of 2008. With its public accounts in order, Brazil had for the first time in history the means to adopt counter-cyclical policies to mitigate the effects of a crisis that was triggered in the rich world. The large volume of accumulated foreign reserves prevented a crisis of confidence against Brazilian currency, and a rigorous regulatory system for financial institutions was able to ensure the strength of the Brazilian banking system, which remained unscattered through the international crisis. There are a lot of data that I could mention referring to the Brazilian economy, but I will just make a few very short remarks. The total foreign trade of Brazil is $480 billion, and our bilateral trade is also very important. I'll approach this item a little further. I also would like to say that the foreign trade, the total foreign trade GDP ratio in Brazil stands at around 22%, and the exports only exports GDP ratio is 9.5. This is much higher than the average countries in the world. This is within the best projections of the IMF and the World Bank, and these are very similar numbers to the US economy. Another important thing is that UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, rated Brazil as one of the 3 main foreign investment destinations in the world for the period 2010-2012, together with the United States at the top of the list and China. So economic muscle and social justice have certainly laid the ground for Brazil's new standing in the world. Foreign policy has also its share of responsibility. As Brazil's economy is strengthened, the country has changed its role in the international arena. Brazil began to take a leading role in various topics internationally, particularly trade, energy, climate change, and reform of multilateral system. Brazil is important and very active player at the World Trade Organization, in which we are discussing the final round of negotiation of the Doha rounds. In energy, Brazil is also has also a leading role, especially for having very clean matrix. As I mentioned before, 81% of the generation of electric power is hydropower, and also it's a leader in the global market of ethanol. And we've been working together with the United States to develop ethanol as a world commodity. And I also would like to say that the new discoveries of oil reserves in Brazil, in the so-called pre-salt layers, will make of Brazil a major oil exporter in the world in the years to come. And today we have 7 wells already producing. Only these 7 wells, that this is maybe less than 1% or around 1% of the total reserves, they are producing 115,000 barrels a day of oil, light oil, which is important to remark, and also 3.5 million metric cubic meters of gas. Brazil so is in a privileged position of being an interlocutor with both the developed countries and the developing countries, as it demonstrates that it can be a significant driver of growth in less developed countries. Regionally, Brazil has played the role of moderator and essential actor in bringing solutions to political crisis. The UNASUL, which is the Union of South American Nations, and the South Defense Council have contributed, which exists and was created within UNASUL, have contributed to maintaining the political stability and democracy in the region. Globally, Brazil has played an active role in new venues of South-South coordination, such as IBSA, which is India, Brazil, and South Africa Forum, and the BRICS. The IBSA Fund, for example, financed several technical cooperation projects throughout the world to benefit some of the world's neediest countries. One of those examples is in Haiti, where Brazil and the United States are working together under the umbrella of the United Nations in the MINUSTA peacekeeping force. These structuring components have created the conditions for a more mature relationship between the United States and Brazil, one that, by overcoming past asymmetries, can now be described as a relationship of equals. And now I'd like to concentrate a little bit on trade and bilateral trade. Our dynamic trade relations is telling of such transformation. Our bilateral trade reached $63.3 billion in 2008. It decreased as a result of the financial crisis, but has already recovered. In the first 3 quarters of 2011, bilateral trade amounted to $47.5 billion, almost 1/3 higher than during the same period last year. Whereas as of 2008, Brazil exports were higher than U.S. exports. Beginning in 2009, bilateral trade has yielded surpluses to the United States. For the year 2011, the surplus is projected to reach, the American surplus in our bilateral trade is projected to reach the sum of almost $13 billion, $12.7 billion, and total trade is projected to reach around $67 billion. It's important to note that President Obama, when he visited Brazil, he mentioned to this situation, to this profile of our bilateral trade, and said, of course, that he was ready to work with the Brazilian government to look for a better balance of our bilateral exchange, but he also mentioned and he recognized that the bilateral, the exports, the U.S. exports to Brazil helped to keep 250,000 jobs in the United States. Our investment relationship has also grown much more complex. Not only the United States is a massive investor in Brazil, but these days Brazil is also an important investor in the U.S. economy. The total amount of our investments in the U.S. economy is around $11 billion. And these investments are responsible for creating 100,000 new direct jobs in the United States. In terms of government relations, it's very important to highlight that the initiatives the U.S. is developing with Brazil are distinct from those on the agenda with some other large countries and emerging economies. With China, the dialogue is more intense in areas primarily associated with economy and trade. With Russia, the dominant topic on the agenda is security and defense. With India, only recently has the relationship began to diversify. But the relation with Brazil, however, includes initiatives in all areas. It is due to a large extent to the convergent values and principles of the two countries, both of which have multicultural and multi-ethnic democracies. Brazil-US relations encompass bilateral, regional, and global agendas. There is no global issue that's not on both of our countries' radar and that we can't discuss and speak about as mature partners. There are also a number of fora, as I mentioned before, that Brazil and the United States work together. Sometimes we have the same position, sometimes we differ and we disagree, but the important thing is that we are very good partners, and that sometimes the best partners is not the one that always say yes, but the one that can present its positions and discuss and try to build bridges and build consensus. I also would like to mention that one of these issues is the reform of the Security Council of the United States, of the United Nations, in which Brazil is trying to have a larger, bigger presence. Brazil wants to be a permanent member of the United Nations because we think that in the 21st century, the Security Council needs to be more democratic and more representative of the world today, and it can no longer be only the photo of what happened in the second half, or the beginning of the second half of last century. I also would like just to mention very rapidly that there are currently more than 24 bilateral mechanisms between Brazil and the United States. Political mechanisms that were created in different occasions and different visits, important visits. One, it's an overarching mechanism that under which all bilateral mechanisms and all bilateral groups or joint working groups or any kind of different dialogue is coordinated. This mechanism is called Global Partnership Dialogue, which was established when Secretary Clinton visited Brazil in March 2010. And the first meeting took place at this moment. The second meeting took place this year in June in Washington, when Foreign Minister Antônio Patriota, who was my predecessor at the embassy as ambassador of Brazil to the United States, headed the Brazilian delegation. Besides this, another important mechanism was established was the Strategic Dialogue on Energy, which was established when President Obama visited Brazil. And there is a third one, which is the Economic Partnership Dialogue, which we had also a very recent and very important meeting in Washington last October. Under these three mechanisms, there are a lot of different other groups that work to bring our countries together, and they work as channels of discussion of specific issues in our bilateral relations, so that good decisions can be taken forward and taken to the president, or when we have different positions, we can channel these differences through these mechanisms and try to find consensus, as I mentioned before, and avoiding that these differences can contaminate other fora in our bilateral relation. I'll just mention there are a number of them. There is the Trade and Economic Cooperation Mission, which is going to take place recently, the Brazil-US CEO Forum, with the participation of the Brazilian Ministry of Industry and Commerce and the Chief of Staff to the President of Brazil, and also the counterparts of the United States, and the main CEOs of the most important companies of the two countries, and they are focused on investment, infrastructure, innovation, information technology, energy, trade, air transport, and so on. And there are a number of different mechanisms. There is a Brazil-United States Common Agenda on the Environment, steering committee of the Memorandum of Understanding to Advanced Cooperation on Biofuels, Brazil-U.S. Joint Commission on Scientific and Technological Development, Brazil-U.S. Conference on Innovation, and a framework agreement for cooperation on the peaceful uses of outer space. And many other important ones we are having in Bahia, in Salvador, in Bahia this week. One of the important meetings of the Joint Action Plan to eliminate racial and ethnic discrimination and promote equality, known as JPER. Well, in addition to these ongoing initiatives, I would like to say a few words about the future of our bilateral relation. The structural reasons that bring our countries together ensure that our bilateral relations are going to deepen and expand in other areas. I would like to discuss briefly our view of where the relationship is ahead in the future. Globally, Brazil and the United States led efforts to increase government transparency with the Open Government Partnership launched in September this year in New York at the margins of the United Nations General Assembly. This is an important mechanism to strengthen democracy. The goal is to ensure accountability, inspection, and citizens' participation, creating ongoing two-way communications between the government and society. On the bilateral front, our governments have been developing initiatives for 4 main key areas. One is energy, and I have mentioned already, but it's energy, environment, science and technology, and the organization of mega events. I think I have told you already so many things about energy, and we could maybe skip all that. But in terms of environment, I would like to say that Brazil will host next year the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, known as Rio+20. This conference will be held in mid-June 2012 in Rio, and will mark the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which took place in 1992. In Rio too. We believe that Rio+20 will be the most important international meeting in the next few years. Considering the sustainable development, that sustainable development is the main theme of the conference, Rio+20 will serve as an opportunity not only to analyze what has been done since Rio 92, but most important, to establish goals and design actions for the next 20 years ahead, while identifying new development models. The conference should look to the future towards overcoming the North-South divide and establishing a new vision of global development. As to science and technology, I would like to mention that the government, and it's a very personal project of President Rousseff, has launched a very ambitious program called Science Without Borders, which is aimed at fostering the exchange of students and researchers between the two countries. The goal of this project is to have 75,000 students, Brazilian students abroad by the end of President Rousseff's term. The government will be funding these 75,000 scholarships, and the president also wants the private sector, the Brazilian private sector, to pay for another 25,000 scholarships. That would make a total of 100,000. Of the 70,000 scholarships that the government will pay for, President Rousseff wants to have half of it, if possible, in the United States. She's very much concentrating on that. She wants Brazilian students to come to the United States and to concentrate especially in the areas of hard sciences, so that this experience should be taken back to Brazil and would have a multiplying factor in our educational system. We have been, the embassy in Washington has been discussing together with the consulate generals in the United States. We have 10 consulates in the country, with local universities in the different areas, and with the amazing number of important universities in this country, over 4,000. It's a very difficult task to select the very high quality, because they are all very high in quality, but we are also trying to select a very important, in very specific areas, courses of excellence in the areas that we need, that it's especially natural science, health, biomedical science, computing and information technology, pharmaceuticals, aerospace, agricultural production, oil and gas, nuclear energy, and so new materials, nanotechnology. It's a long list. And I'm sure that in California we'll find excellent universities and excellent colleges for all those specialties. So I hope in the future we'll have a larger number of Brazilian students here in the United States, and especially in California. Now, last word on major global sporting events. Brazil will be hosting in 2014 the FIFA World Cup, and 2 years later, in 2016, the Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games. This creates a huge need for investments. We are welcoming investments from all countries, and especially from the United States, to help us build new infrastructure, not only for sports event, not only arena sports, but also roads, airports, and so on, the whole infrastructure. This means a lot of investment, and of course this will create a lot of new opportunities, and of course huge benefits to the tourism and to the population in general. And of course, this was also an issue that was discussed between both heads of states when President Obama visited Brazil in March, and we even signed a memorandum of understanding to cooperate, taking advantage of the experience of the United States with the World Soccer Cup that took place in here. The final was here in this area. I can't remember when, 2002, 94? Well, 94. And the Olympics, which you hosted so many times. So, just as a final remark, I'd like to say that the relationship between Brazil and the United States is based on on shared values and has structural elements working in its favor. As a result, we live in a particularly productive moment in our relations, a moment which opens up a wide array of opportunities for cooperation in political and economic issues. The cooperation between our countries created a dialogue in 3 levels: bilateral, regional, and global. I would like to highlight that regarding global issues, Brazil is committed to updating and reforming the important international institutions, as I mentioned before, not only the United Nations, but the World Bank, the IMF, and all other multilateral economic and political institutions. As I thank you for the interest in how Brazil and the United States are working together, I would like to recall that, once again, that President Dilma Rousseff is planning to visit the United States early next year. This highly anticipated visit will serve as another important landmark in Brazil-US relationships, and will consolidate initiatives our both governments have been working on since President Obama visited Brazil. I am very glad to be here. I'd like to thank you very much. I hope I didn't take much of your time, and I thank you very much for your presence, and of course I'll be ready to answer the questions that you may have. Thank you very much.